Welcome to NTD News Today. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. A new crew of 4 astronauts arrives at the International Space Station for an 8-month science mission. They'll study everything from bacteria to plants. Investigators find DNA on Nancy Guthrie's property that does not belong to her, nor those close to her, as the search enters its 3rd week. President Trump and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu agree to ramp up pressure on Iran, targeting oil exports to China. Meanwhile, the U.S. military prepares for a possible weeks-long operation. U.S. investors suing the South Korean government over one of its leading e-commerce platforms. This comes as an international controversy escalates. David Lamb brings us more on that. And Australia investing nearly $2.8 billion in a new shipyard for its nuclear-powered submarine program. The Prime Minister there calling it a down payment on the nation's future. And we'll take a look at another way to tackle the blues, how to add some sunshine back into a dimmed-down life without the need for prescription drugs.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Members of President Donald Trump's Board of Peace have pledged more than $5 billion in aid for Gaza. That's the president's announcing that this morning on his Truth Social. He says, quote, "On February 19th, 2026, I will again be joined by Board of Peace members at the Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., where we will announce that member states have pledged more than $5 billion toward the Gaza humanitarian reconstruction efforts." In his own words. Next, a crew of 4 astronauts, or Crew-12. It's arrived at the International Space Station for an 8-month science mission. They traveled aboard SpaceX's Dragon capsule Freedom, which launched from Florida last Friday. Leading the team is veteran astronaut Jessica Meir. On her 2nd trip to the space station, she's joined by rookie astronaut Jack Hathaway, European Space Agency astronaut Sophie Aidnot, and Russian cosmonaut Andrei Fedyev.
I don't even know how to describe what it's like to be up here. You just float in, and it's just such a cool experience. It's been a great trip with my great Crew-12 friends. I'm so excited to join Expedition 74, see my classmate again. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm going to pass over to Sophie.
The first time we looked at the Earth was, wow, mind-blowing. The Earth is so beautiful from up there. And literally, we see no lines, no borders. And it was, yeah, a very big moment for us, Jack and me, to see that for the first time. So we're happy to share it with you in the future events.
Crew-12 was welcomed aboard the International Space Station by 3 current occupants. The station is the largest man-made object in space, spanning the length of a football field. It has been continuously operated by a U.S.-Russian-led consortium that also includes Canada, Japan, and 11 European countries. NASA says Crew-12 will dive into a busy schedule of scientific, medical, and technical research in microgravity. Their work includes studying pneumonia-causing bacteria to improve treatments on Earth. And will experiment with plants to boost food production in space. Much of the science is focused on perfecting technologies NASA hopes to use in future missions to the Moon and to Mars. It's aimed at helping astronauts live and work safely farther from home. Very exciting. Meanwhile, SpaceX successfully launched 24 new Starlink satellites Saturday from California. The Falcon 9 rocket's first stage landed safely on a drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Investigators say they found DNA at Nancy Guthrie's property that does not belong to her or those close to her. It's the latest clue in the missing person case that has gripped the nation. Despite the search for Nancy Guthrie stretching toward a 3rd week, authorities in Tucson, Arizona, working round the clock to find the missing 84-year-old.
We're doing everything we can, humanly possible. We want to find Nancy.
The latest clue in the case, DNA evidence found at Guthrie's property, as you heard. Law enforcement conducted a late-night operation Friday, miles from Guthrie's home for several hours. They arrested 4 people and later released them. Guthrie's the mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie. Based on this recently released doorbell camera video at Nancy Guthrie's door, the FBI says the suspect is a man with an average build and about 5'9" or 5'10". They say he was wearing an Ozark trail hiker backpack. Since Guthrie's disappearance, her children have published videos pleading for her safe return, the most recent being to say, "We will never give up on her." And we'll certainly be keeping you updated there. Next, Secretary of State Marco Rubio sent an invitation for a shared future to European leaders at the annual Munich Security Conference. He said Washington wants a renewed partnership that aligns with President Trump's push for national revival, tougher border control, and a return to industrial and military strength.
We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong.
Rubio said that the fundamental question facing the alliance was not simply how much to spend on defense or how to deploy forces, but rather how to share a common understanding of what the United States and its allies are defending. Joining us now to discuss Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference is Kervin Oquin, former lead intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance coordinator for the U.S. Army. Good to have you with us today, Kervin. We heard Rubio describing a single Western civilization rooted in Christian faith, shared ancestry, and the sacrifices of our forefathers. Does defining the conflict in civilizational terms change how we prioritize threats from Beijing, from Moscow, and from radical Islamist movements?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again for having me on. It's good to see you. And absolutely, I think what Rubio was doing here, quite the stark contrast from J.D. Vance 1 year ago, who chastised European nations for their open borders and for allowing, as he would say, the war in Ukraine to go on. So Rubio's taking a different tone here, but he's absolutely correct in his assessment that the U.S. and Europe have shared values, that they need to work together as allies. A war, a global conflict against exactly what you talked about, China, Russia, Islamic extremism, that cannot be won without a strong alliance. And that strong alliance is between the U.S. and Western Europe, but it takes a stronger Western European defense program to hold up their end of the bargain. And I think that's what Rubio was getting at there.
So when Rubio says President Trump is demanding serious reciprocity from Europe, what concrete indicators would look like for you in terms of defense spending, force posture, intel sharing, or such, to decide whether Europe is really taking it seriously and stepping up?
Yeah, like President Trump has been, he's been consistent in this, right? NATO countries need to be spending 5% of their GDP. Long gone are the days where the United States and the United States military are paying for for the defense of the world. We are no longer the global police. I think that's what both Republicans and Democrats have agreed to, that the U.S. can no longer sustain being the world police. And so that's one part of it. having having NATO countries do that 5% defense spending. But you touched on something very important to me there, and that is the intelligence sharing, right? So Europe has been getting away for many years with just relying on U.S. intelligence spending and the sheer amount of U.S. intelligence that is being shared among all partners. And I think that especially with what's going on in Ukraine with Russia, that the onus is on Europe and Western Europe to do those intelligence collection and the tradecraft there and provide that, much like the U.S. has provided vast amounts of intelligence to Western Europe. Western Europe needs to, that's the reciprocity that we're talking about here. We need to have shared, equal sharing of intelligence there.
And Rubio also talked about sharing cultural bonds and spiritual bonds, not just the economic and military ties, but in terms of your expertise, do the porous borders, uncontrolled migration that the U.S. has warned of in Europe and the cultural fragmentation that kind of shows up there as part of it, are they real vulnerabilities in terms of ISR assessments and deterrence planning, or do you think Western leaders are not really treating them as relating to national security?
Well, I think two things are true there, and one of which is that I'll hit on the last thing you said, which is that European leaders do not, they've got their head in the sand. They do not see this mass migration, especially coming from North Africa into places like Italy and Spain. And we're not talking about a mass migration of people that are just trying to flee, trying to flee the violence of their countries. Yes, there is some of that going on. But what is happening here is this is giving, this is allowing for Islamic extremists to go into the ranks of those people trying to flee and get into countries like France and Germany and Italy, and those countries are seeing it. We're not hearing this in global media and things like that, but if you get into those countries and you talk to the people who are dealing with this, the business owners on a day-to-day basis, they see it every day. Germany, as an example, has spent the last 5 or 6 years protests on both sides, but protests from business leaders that this mass migration, just allowing this to happen, has negatively affected their business and their populations. We're seeing it in France, we're seeing it in Spain, and it's not helping anyone in Western Europe. And it is, as I always say, the thing here is that it is a quick flight from France, Germany, Spain into the United States. It's so difficult to get from Western Africa or Northern Africa into the United States. But once you've breached those borders into Western Europe, it becomes so much easier to get Islamic extremists into the United States.
Fascinating point there. And in terms of threats from the CCP and potentially from Russia as well, some authoritarian regimes do openly conduct information and influence operations aimed at undermining Western faith, confidence, and cultural cohesion. We've seen many examples of that. But what have you seen in terms of how, and also how the West should adapt if it really believes it is in a civilizational struggle?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it there. The CCP, the Russian state media, they are being, they're very good at messaging and anti-Western messaging. Look, it worked in Africa, in a place that I worked in Niger, where they removed first French forces and then U.S. forces out of that country. And now we have this minimal intelligence area within the Western Sahel, and you've got terrorist groups like JNIM and the Islamic State who are rising up in these areas again, where once they were broken and defeated, the U.S. got out to give Russia a foothold into those African nations, and now we're seeing a rise of Islamic extremism there. But we've also got social media. We've all talked about TikTok and how the CCP has owned TikTok, even the U.S. version through ByteDance. Now there are some changes that are going on there, but don't be fooled for a second. China is going to use social media to make the U.S. look bad, to make Western Europe look bad. And there's a reason for that. That is, when they do invade Taiwan, that there is a global outcry that China is doing the right thing because of things that they've seen, that young people have seen on social media.
Yeah, this infiltration that we've seen so much of. And for viewers who hear Rubio's words and your words indeed, and worry that the West is already well into decline, based on what you've seen in the intelligence world, are we still early enough in this fight to turn it around? And what would you tell ordinary citizens who want to help defend the civilization that he's talking about?
Look, absolutely. We are not at a point of no return here. Western Europe needs to wake up. The United States needs to be strong and be strong for the allies. We cannot keep this infighting. What I always say is like these public political statements that even someone like Rubio, who is trying to position himself as a candidate for president in the next presidential election. I'm not too worried about the words that they say publicly, because that is a messaging to a certain voter base, or the messages of Merz in Germany, or Macron in France. Those public messaging, I'm not too worried about. I am more concerned about what's going on behind the scenes. Are those conversations happening? Look, this conference is happening with U.S. combatant commanders at the conference who were talking to their peers in European militaries. I want to know what those conversations, I'm going to do some deep diving into how those conversations ended out. And knowing some of these combatant commanders, I know they are strong. They want a strong U.S. They want a strong alliance in Western Europe. We are nowhere near a point of no return right now. And if the U.S. people want to know what they should be doing right now, I will say it frankly, get off social media, stop screaming at people, stop yelling at people. We are at a time, we are on the brink of a time in our history where the world will need to come together to fight a common evil. And if we are bickering back and forth about minute details of certain things, then we are in a lot of trouble.
Carvin Okran, always great to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. And folks can learn more and hear more of your work at your podcast, This Week Explained. Thanks again, Carvin.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that plug. It's always a pleasure. And as always, stay safe out there.
And after the meeting at the White House, President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to step up pressure on Iran to give up its nuclear program. According to Axios, this includes targeting Tehran's oil exports to China, which account for 80% of its shipments. Trump has already signed an executive order imposing 25% tariffs on China for trading with Iran. Meanwhile, Reuters reports that the U.S. military is preparing for the possibility of sustained weeks-long operations against Iran if President Trump orders an attack.
The disclosure raises the stakes for the diplomacy underway between the United States and Iran. U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will hold negotiations with Iran on Tuesday in Geneva, with representatives from Oman acting as mediators. On Saturday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Trump's preference was to reach a deal with Tehran, but said, quote, "That's very hard to do."
I believe the Ayatollah and his regime, not the Iranian people, are religious fanatics, religious Nazis. Hitler wanted a master race. They want a master religion. So why I mention that? There's no negotiating with these people, in my view. They're hell-bent on enacting an agenda based on religion that teaches them to lie, teaches them to destroy in the name of God.
Meanwhile, Trump has amassed military forces in the region. U.S. officials said on Friday the Pentagon was sending an additional aircraft carrier to the Middle East, adding thousands more troops along with firepower capable of waging attacks and defending against them. No action. On Friday, Trump was asked if he'd want to see regime change in Iran.
Well, it seems like that would be the best thing that could happen. For 47 years, they've been talking and talking and talking. In the meantime, we've lost a lot of lives.
Trump has long voiced skepticism about sending ground troops into Iran. And the kinds of U.S. firepower arrayed into the Middle East so far suggest options for strikes primarily by air and naval forces. Asked for comment on the preparations for a potentially sustained U.S. military operation, a White House spokesperson said, quote, President Trump has all options on the table with regard to Iran. The Pentagon declined to comment. In a sustained campaign, the U.S. military could hit Iranian state and security facilities, not just nuclear infrastructure, one of the officials said, who declined to provide specific details. Trump has repeatedly threatened to bomb Iran over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs and crushing of internal dissent. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has warned that, in case of strikes on Iranian territory, it could retaliate against any U.S. military base.
I think President Trump realizes that he needs to convince the whole world that given a diplomatic solution or diplomatic effort the maximum chance. We will have to see to what extent the Iranians from their side are willing to settle for what is being asked. I don't see it very likely that they will actually come even close to what are the demands, which will then say, look, by diplomatic means we haven't managed to get it done, so now we can move forward with that.
President Trump posted Friday that voter ID would be required in the upcoming midterm elections. He said, quote, I've searched the depths of legal arguments not yet articulated or vetted on this subject and will be presenting an irrefutable one in the very near future. Continuing, he said, if we can't get it through Congress, there are legal reasons why this scam is not permitted. I will be presenting them shortly in the form of an executive order, unquote. Now, the House has passed the Save America Act, sending a Trump-backed election bill to the Senate, which would require proof of citizenship to vote. Senate Republicans gained a key ally, Senator Susan Collins, in their quest to enshrine voter ID into law. Do voters feel confident about the integrity of our elections? NTD Sam Wong was out in D.C. to hear from the people.
Do you think currently our federal elections have enough guardrails?
No, too many loopholes. There's not enough accountability with the elections.
It does allow for a margin of error, so I think if you had to show ID, it would help alleviate any concerns or misconcerns people have about illegal voting.
I never really have had a problem with American elections before. It always seems they've been handled in a fair and honest way before this. It never needed a photo ID of me beforehand, so I don't know why they need it of anybody else.
We have an extra, 200,000 votes that were cast in Georgia. They just found out that weren't supposed to be cast. Trump lost the 2020 election by, 11,000 votes in Georgia, and there's 200,000 votes there. That right there alone just tells you already that our elections are already, in danger of stuff.
Well, we saw it in the last election with ballot dropping and the ballot boxes and the mail-ins and people getting, I got three mail-in ballots. I don't even use mail-in ballots.
What are your thoughts on the SAVE Act? Do you think it's a reasonable step towards election integrity?
I mean, it should be. We should already have election integrity. We should already have voter ID for everything. Everyone's saying it's so hard to get ID and it's holding people back from it. They're just lying. They want people not to have ID so they can actually cheat in elections.
I would say that that's probably overreaching. I don't know that we need any more proof other than the proofs that have been given in the past. I don't really see what the point would be other than exclusion.
I had to have ID to get on the airplane to come over here, so got to have ID to go to the bank. Got to have ID to drive. Everyone here has ID, and I think it's a good idea.
I think if you look at things internationally, a lot of other countries have protections for their elections, and we should do the same thing.
It's common sense. Everyone, and it's almost demeaning when they say a certain demographic of people aren't able to get it. They are able to get it. They're intelligent people. It's demeaning, I think so.
Yeah, they try to say that it's going to stop 60 million or 70 million women from being able to vote. It's ridiculous.
Ahead, Australia investing nearly $2.8 billion in a new shipyard for its nuclear-powered submarine program under AUKUS. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese calling it a down payment on the nation's future. U.S. investors are suing the South Korean government over one of its leading e-commerce platforms. This comes as an international controversy escalates. David Lamb has more in just a moment. Welcome back. Portugal's parliament has approved a new law that blocks children under 13 from using social media at all. and requires express verified parental consent for teens up to 16 to have accounts on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Joining us now is Andrew Selepak, a social media professor at the University of Florida, who studies how online platforms shape our culture and communication. Good to have you with us, Andrew. First, help us understand what Portugal has actually done, how significant the move is, and how it compares to other countries around the world, including the U.S.
Well, one of the things that essentially what Portugal's looking to do is try to prevent young people under the age of 16 from being able to just kind of go onto social media and use the platforms however, whenever they want, with some limitations, WhatsApp being one of them. This is kind of standard that we're seeing in Europe. Australia has done something similar as well, where you have these countries that kind of recognize that there's a danger for young people being on social media, being exposed to different content. While they're still in their formative years, they don't necessarily have the media literacy skills, the understanding, and can be very impressionable. So they're looking for a solution to a problem, whether or not it's a viable solution, a practical solution, or even a good solution, is sort of where we're at the moment.
And in concrete terms, how close or far is a country like the U.S. from doing something similar?
Well, keep in mind, when we're talking about right now is European countries, Australia, we're talking about places that don't have their own social media. You've even had some European government leaders basically saying they're concerned about American and Chinese social media. Here in the U.S., overwhelmingly people here are using companies we're familiar with, Meta, YouTube, things like that. Other places around the world, they are using some of the Chinese social media platforms, but Europe doesn't have any. We don't associate any social media platforms with Germany, the UK, France. They really haven't contributed to that space in quite some time, outside of some peripheral things like Telegram, or if you want to count Spotify. So for them, they're basically looking at this as a way to regulate something that they don't really have a close association with. And I think a lot of it is not necessarily because they're trying to protect children. There's a lot of ways that they're not protecting children in many of these European countries. But if you look in the sort of the details, a lot of it is if the companies don't sort of comply with their laws, they have huge fines that they're going to put into place to these very, very wealthy trillion-dollar companies. So I think part of it is, looking to find a way to protect children. I don't think this is necessarily going to be the best way. I more lean on the side of education, but I think a big part of it is also, again, that they don't have European social media platforms. They don't have that sort of connection to it. And instead, they're looking at it as a way to kind of levy fines.
Yeah, so let's talk about potential other solutions that could be implemented here in the USA. You've talked about education. What would that look like in terms of what is really effective? And what can parents do who may want to help their children out before Congress potentially takes more further action?
So kind of a big question. If we kind of look at it in maybe two different parts, the first part would be with parents. I think the big thing for parents, regardless of how young your child is, 1, 2, 3 years old, 13, 18 years old. One of the big things for them is just to understand the platforms. Mostly if we think about maybe Gen Z, younger millennial parents, they have a pretty good idea of what these platforms are doing, the influence that they can have. But maybe older millennial parents, Gen X parents, they don't necessarily understand the platforms, the new platforms, how people are consuming content, the amount of content being consumed on there. So for them, one of the first things is just kind of learning about it and being comfortable. It's also important for them to recognize the impact that it has. A lot of people don't necessarily recognize that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, we're kind of putting them in a petri dish and sort of testing how so much content will impact young minds, how will impact that moving forward. And, it's a bit concerning that we don't it's basically like testing a drug and we don't know what the side effects are going to be until it's too late. The flip side, if you want to talk about what, essentially governments here or the U.S. government can do, with that, I don't know necessarily if much is going to happen, only because we know that these companies are spending a lot of money on lobbying and preventing any legislation or regulation from being passed.
And in terms of education, if we can separate that out potentially from congressional action, what would some effective education tools look like to you?
Well, I mean, I think that would go into a kind of conversation about sort of K through 12 education as a whole and how much it's actually really teaching young people the life skills that they need. But one of them would just be sort of the media literacy aspect, understanding that media content has an impact on the audience, what those impacts are, the differences between individuals, that, simply watching a piece of content does not impact everyone the same across the board, but it's really dependent on individuals. And it's kind of recognizing the individuality of people and how consuming media content, especially for young people, can have very different but also very long-term and lasting effects. So some of it is for probably educators to also become educated on these topics and these issues, and then implementing them into K through 12 education. That's always generally a fight in and of itself. Where would it fit? Obviously not in a math class or a social studies class. Does it fit into an English class? Do we suddenly start adding new technology classes? That's really, I think, where we have the devil in the details, but it's very necessary, I think, for young people to gain these types of skills, abilities, and knowledge, as well as the people teaching the classes who can then teach these skills, abilities, and knowledge.
An ongoing experiment, as you say. Thank you so much, Andrew Selepak. Great to have your insights today.
Thank you.
And after a recent data breach at one of the nation's leading e-commerce companies, multiple American investors are suing the South Korean government in an international controversy. NTD's David Lamb has that story.
U.S. investors are suing the South Korean government, claiming that the government is discriminating against the U.S.-based company Coupang. On Thursday, 3 more investors, including Abrams Capital, Durable Capital Partners, and Foxhaven Asset Management, joined the case. Investors say after Coupang's data security breach that happened in November, South Korea unlawfully investigated and handled the situation. The investment firms submitted letters petitioning the U.S. government to investigate South Korea's actions. Adam Ferrer with the Center for Strategic and International Studies says this case has grown into a broader issue of claims of unfair treatment toward American tech companies.
This question of data localization and whether companies like Google Maps can actually provide mapping services in Korea because of national security restrictions that exist. And so within that dynamic, this Coupang situation has emerged, a very real crisis for Coupang given this massive data breach, but that Coupang has seemingly effectively turned into a geopolitical issue between the United States and Korea.
Coupang said that a former employee, a Chinese national, accessed data from over 33 million accounts, but retained about 3,000 before deleting it. It said the former employee didn't access sensitive data such as payment information and passwords. The e-commerce company is based in Seattle, Washington, but operates in South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. It's often referred to as the Amazon of South Korea. In January, 2 U.S. investment firms filed a notice to South Korea's Ministry of Justice saying they suffered losses after the government's investigation. While other tech breaches in Korea resulted in penalties, Coupang reportedly has faced threats of massive fines and suspension of operations. South Korea's Justice Ministry said the government will make every effort to respond in a systematic and professional manner to the legal actions. The legal action comes at a time that could escalate trade frictions between the Trump administration and South Korea. David Lamb, NTD News.
And Australia is putting nearly $2.8 billion toward building a new shipyard. The facility will support its nuclear-powered submarine program under the AUKUS Defence Pact with the US and UK. Here's Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese speaking on the move earlier today.
This is a driver not just of our national security and how we're going to defend our nation into the future, it's also a driver of our economic prosperity. This is in the interests of the United States, in the interests of the UK and in the interests of Australia. And that is why this is a project that is progressing in accordance with not just the principles but the plan of action which we are rolling out.
The AUKUS Pact, announced in 2021, is Australia's largest defence investment ever. Under the agreement, U.S. commanded Virginia-class submarines will be based in Australia starting next year. Australia is expected to buy several of those submarines around 2030. Meanwhile, Britain and Australia will work together to build a new class of nuclear-powered submarines. The total projected cost is about $21 billion over the coming decades. The Pentagon review back in December said there are opportunities to strengthen the agreement further. That includes making sure Australia is moving quickly enough to build out its nuclear submarine capabilities. And ahead, over 18% of U.S. adults experience depression, according to a 2025 Gallup poll. For those who haven't found relief through standard treatments like antidepressants or therapy, traditional Chinese medicine offers a different approach, and we'll be looking at that very shortly. Welcome back. Baby food recalled in 49 U.S. states. TippyToes apple, pear, banana, fruit puree is affected by the recall. No illnesses or injuries related to the recalled product have been reported. Initiative Foods has recalled a single lot of its TippyToes apple, pear, banana, fruit puree due to elevated levels of patulin. That's a naturally occurring substance which is produced by molds that may grow in various fruits. The FDA says long-term exposure to patulin ingestion can lead to several health issues, including nerve damage and immune suppression. No illnesses have been reported in connection to the recall. Customers should either throw it away or return it to the store for a refund. And next, we're looking at traditional Chinese medicine, focusing on the body's energy channels. Vital Signs' Brendan Fallon, now with insights from two doctors into how the targeting of energy channels can help ease both pain and depression.
Depression is such a widespread problem in society. There are millions of Americans that are affected by this each year, and some of them just don't get many results from the standard treatments, like antidepressants or even therapy. Antidepressants, the efficacy of these things, especially the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, have been increasingly questioned over the years, with the idea that maybe reduced serotonin isn't necessarily linked to the depression symptoms that people experience. So where does this leave people who are still struggling with these symptoms and have tried the antidepressants and haven't got much results from therapy? Some people get results from outside treatments, like acupuncture, for example, trying herbal treatments, things like meditation. So I was very interested to find out why these kinds of treatments might work and how they connect to this idea of energy, that we have energy in our body as understood through traditional Chinese medicine. So I've spoken to a number of doctors on this topic. The first one I'll introduce is Dr. Joseph Audet, who's an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and a physiatrist, which means he's a pain specialist. And he was telling me about how acupuncture is being used by the U.S. Air Force, as compelling an argument as any for the existence of this type of energy that is understood in traditional Chinese medicine. Here's what he said about it.
As of 2018, there was this huge movement to train all clinicians from a med tech level right up to a physician level in this very simple technique called battlefield acupuncture, which was learning 5 points on the that you could put needles into the ear that could have this incredible effect on relieving pain. And so now there's such a broad integration of acupuncture in the military that even on the front lines, if there's an injury and someone's being airshipped back to a hospital, on the way back to the hospital, they have these needles put into their ear, and it's integrated into whatever else the treatment is going to be to save their life or to get their pain under control. It can even be integrated with regular pain meds, but what they're finding is there's a dramatic reduction in the need for opioids.
And so if battlefield acupuncture is effective to the degree that the U.S. Air Force is willing to invest in it and is seeing results from it, that's one suggestion that pain is operating across energy channels, as well as obviously other dimensions of our bodies. So if something like acupuncture that's targeting energy channels and freeing the energy flow can have such a benefit on a physical health side, what can it do on a mental health side? Well, we know that sleep is crucial to mental health, And I've seen my own evidence on the sleep side because I've had sleeping problems in the past. And I've tried meditation, which is said to improve the energy flow, as well as Qigong exercise. And on nights where I couldn't sleep, I've done these things and then slept very well, almost instantaneously. So that's the evidence I've had personally. I wanted to learn more about these energy channels, what they are specifically, what the different types of them are. So I spoke to a doctor. I couldn't think of anyone better to speak to than Dr. Jing Duanyang, who's a fifth-generation Chinese medicine doctor, traditional Chinese medicine doctor, as well as an integrative medicine doctor and a board-certified psychiatrist. So he's straddling all these areas, and he's incorporating these different approaches, these different modalities to improve people's mental health. This is what he had to say about what this type of energy is exactly.
So in the way, the Chinese concept of qi, which is the description of different form of energy in the body, is almost like very closely equivalent to the energy that produced in our mitochondria. So in the way, mitochondrial dysfunction will cause problems in almost every health issues, because if it's involved in the neurons or nerve cells, then it's caused trouble with nerve system. If it happens in the heart or in the gut or in the muscles or in the liver, and it will cause other problems. And so it is interesting to see how we further understand the function of mitochondria and also communication of mitochondria with each other inside the cells and between cells and between tissues and organs, because that understanding will lead to what the Chinese medicine called energetic channels or meridian systems.
Now, there is a range of different emotions that are associated with depression, from rage and resentment to isolation, feeling lonely, to feeling sad and having low self-esteem and feelings of low self-worth. It's always intrigued me the way that emotion is tied to physical sensation in the body and how it can actually manifest physical symptoms. We talk about experiencing butterflies in the stomach when we're worried about something. We experience heartache, we call it heartbreak, when we grieve or have a significant loss in our lives. So I wondered how this idea of energy channels might be a kind of bridge between the emotions that we experience and these physical sensations. And I asked Dr. Young about this, and he talks about how different emotions, particularly negative emotions when we're talking about depression, are linked to different parts of the body as understood in TCM. And the parts of the body he talks about, like the spleen and the lung, these aren't the same as we understand in Western medicine as these anatomical structures. In Chinese medicine, the spleen, for example, is talking about an energetic functional system. This is what Dr. Young had to say about those.
So if it generates the worry and bad feelings about yourself, it's going to affect your spleen stomach energetically and make you obsessed, make you worried, make you having trouble thinking clearly, make you have trouble with digestions, with metabolism, and cause feeling heavy in the body and has trouble build or maintain the muscles and so on and so forth. So emotionally make them, mentally make them obsessed and have low self-esteem. And if you look at this is another form of depression when people just feel bad about themselves. They're not necessarily angry or resentful.
And so based on this traditional Chinese medicine understanding that these functional energy systems in the body, like that of the spleen, the lung, the heart, are connected with certain emotions, in the case of depression, certain negative emotions, Dr. Young went on to illustrate a scenario whereby if someone wants to hurt you physically, they may hit you. If they want to hurt you biochemically, they may poison you. But if they want to hurt you energetically, they just need to say something that triggers a response in relation to the emotions of these certain energy centers, for instance, triggering your rage or your feeling of low self-worth, and they could potentially cause an energy blockage in relation to that energy channel. This knowledge is interesting to have. The question is, how do you apply it to deal with an energy blockage that may be causing a mental health problem? So I put to Young the question, if our interactions with other people trigger certain emotions that can cause an energy channel blockage. Is the reverse of that true? If we can free up an energy blockage, does that mean it's going to improve our social interactions with people? And this is what he said.
Some of the techniques that today's people use, for example, mindfulness-based meditation, and so much study had demonstrated the healing power of it. But if you look at what it is really derived from the Buddhist practice, where the compassion was fundamental core values, and where you treat every adversary events from human perspective as an opportunity to refine and improve your capability of tolerance or being compassionate.
And I think a key value of these traditional spiritual practices is that they foster a hopefulness about what lies ahead, and through that an optimistic lens through which to interpret sometimes the challenging things that we encounter in day-to-day life. And that positive outlook can increasingly be shown to have a positive effect on our physical health and probably helping the free flow of energy in our bodies. I'm Brendan Fallon. It's been great to be with you. You can find my full videos at ntd.com by looking in the Shows tab under Vital Signs. Hope to see you soon.
Up ahead, an Italian ice dance couple enjoying their final Olympics Valentine's Day. Details on their love story that began over 16 years ago. Italian ice dance partners Charlene Guaynard and Marco Fabbri enjoyed their final Olympic Valentine's Day on Saturday, and for once, some time to breathe. The romantic partners won bronze in the team event last Sunday.
It's the first time we spend Valentine's Day, not at the Olympic Games, but like with this context. And so we are trying to enjoy this night as much as we can.
The two met in the year 2009 at a time when both of them were looking for a figure skating partner. Fabbri said they felt it would work between them from the very beginning. It didn't take long for the professional connection to turn romantic. Over 16 years later, they're still skating side by side. This will also be the couple's last Olympics. With the Games nearing its end, the two said they still have one more performance to go. Exhibition ice skating gala on the eve of the closing ceremony. Fabbri said they aim to skate with their hearts and soak up what he called the final emotions of the Games. If you're still wondering what to do with all those Mardi Gras beads, a Mississippi native has an idea. She turned her bead stash into a backyard alligator, and it only took about 80 hours and a whole lot of glue. So don't throw those beads away just yet. Your yard might need a sea turtle next. Architect Daria Pizzetta turned her bead collection into a larger-than-life alligator this Mardi Gras season. The project took about 80 hours, as you've heard, over 2 weeks, and Pizzetta and her family carefully glued colorful beads onto plywood to form detailed scales and patterns. The beads all caught during parades, none bought. For Pizzetta, it's more than decoration, it's creative recycling, family bonding, and the beginning of a backyard bayou collection that may soon include a pelican, frog, turtle, maybe a crawfish. So some ideas for you there. That's all we have time for now. And that's all for today's news, but thanks for tuning in. Stay with us for NTD Evening News at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific.